and bring us the news capsule for that week. Are we ready?
We're ready for it, and then we'll bring Donnie on and discuss it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the dulcet tones of Mr. Donny Laible.
Let's get right to the capsule. World Championship Wrestling dominates this week's edition. Tonight, beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, WCW presents their longest-running pay-per-view show, Starrcade, in Norfolk, Virginia's Scope Arena. Now, the main draw for their audience is the 40-man Battle Bowls Lethal Lottery. Prior to the match, names will be drawn to determine 20 tag teams. The surviving 20 individuals not to be pinned or submit will engage in a two-ring battle royal to come up with a single overall winner. And in New Jersey's Byrne Arena this past Friday night, WCW made their return to the metropolitan area in several months. An estimated 5,000 people journeyed to the Meadowlands to get an overall view of the promotion and to get for the first time in person a view of Japanese mat sensation and WCW light heavyweight champion Jushin Thunder Liger. Now, in running down some of the show's results, it was WCW heavyweight champ Lex Luger going to a double countout with Rick Steiner. Cactus Jack and Abdullah the Butcher got the win over Van Hammer and Elegante. Stunning Steve Austin went to a surprising time limit draw with Scott Steiner. U.S. champ Ravishing Rick Rude scored a win by disqualification over Sting. And the WCW World Tag Team champs Ricky Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes retained their belts in battling Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson. Surprisingly, also, no return date was given for WCW in the Meadowlands. Well, check your local TV listings for this coming Friday's airing of Inside Edition. That's January 3rd. Former Worldwide Wrestling Federation champion superstar Billy Graham and former wrestling main eventer Dr. D. David Schultz are expected to be the focal guests speaking on steroid and other possible drug usage they allegedly experienced, along with others who are with the WWF during their tenure with the promotion in the mid-1980s. And a sad note closes out the capsule. This past week, former wrestling great Wilbur Snyder passed away. In his heyday in the ring during the 1950s and 60s, Snyder demonstrated a terrific sense of balance, leverage, agility, and remarkable reflexes against all challenges. After a celebrated collegiate mat career at the University of Utah, Snyder, a native of Van Nuys, California, turned pro under the guidance of Sandor Zasbo. A two-time collector of the United States title as recognized out of the Detroit office, and the AWA heavyweight belt was his by defeating Vern Gagne back in November of 1958. Capsule time, 12:25.
Don, I found it interesting that Wilbur Snyder died at that point because he wasn't that far retired at that point, was he?
No, he was rather young, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when I think of Wilbur Snyder, I think of the not only the AWA, but Dick the Bruiser's promotion out of Indiana. It was always you could think of Crusher. Some of the people that were always there, and Wilbur Snyder seemed to spend most of his time there and earlier with Vern Gagne. Vern loved the quote athletes from college, the legitimate amateur wrestlers, the football players. That's who Vern really enjoyed bringing aboard. So it was something that at that time, because as I said, he was rather young, passed away, and at the time considered a legend in the business.
Oh, for sure. You know, that WWA, they were loyal to their guys. I mean, there were guys there. El Bracero wrestled there forever. Wilbur Snyder. I'm talking into the 90s. I mean, a lot of, Dick the Bruiser, Moose Sholok. I mean, these guys hung on and hung on and hung on, but people kept coming out to see him. And even as the crowds dwindled, they were still the heroes there.
Yeah. Dick the Bruiser's son-in-law, Spike Huber, was also another mainstay there for a long time. But, looking at also reflecting on the card at the Meadowlands, back in 91, when still it was always seen as everything in the tri-state area and the Northeast really was, Vince McMahon promotions. Just when they came there, it was still pretty exciting to see them come to Jersey, and there was always that little hope that they're going to come into New York, and not Nassau Coliseum, but Madison Square Garden. But as we've learned in previous show about Eddie Einhorn, he gave it all his best and couldn't get into the Garden. I think, and I'm sure someone could correct me on this, but at the time, I thought the rental price for the Garden for a night was $250,000. That included all your union people with the lighting and ushers and security and whatever. So it was always exciting to see another promotion come to the area, and Jushin Liger was there, which was great. I remember John had him at his convention, which was phenomenal. But it was good to see another promotion there, and it was enjoyable.
We always wanted the WCW to do well. We wanted them to draw well. And that was always a disappointment because no matter what, they would have a little steam and then it would deflate. I mean, you'd get excited and then it would go away. It just was not consistent, but every time they came into town, you had that anticipation of, wow, it's going to be a great show and hopefully fans are going to show up and there won't be a blizzard or something that also used to come into play. But they were snake bitten.
They sure were, because I think it was their first card there that Flair retained the title from Sting at the first attempt of booking that arena on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a heck of a way to get it started. And I thought that would spread word of mouth, but it didn't really materialize that way, did it?
No.
I think a lot has to do because I remember when Pro Wrestling USA was there, when you had a combination of the NWA, the AWA, joining forces to go against the McMahon, spreading nationwide. But like any successful business, leadership matters. What you have at the top filters down. And it just seemed that when TBS took over WCW, it was always people in charge who had no clue about wrestling, didn't want to have a clue. I mean, it was Harvey Schiller, there was Jim Herd. It didn't get the proper respect that it should have gotten. And that's why they would have steam and they wouldn't have steam. They could do this, but they couldn't do that. Just as a side note, on the board of directors of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum is Dr. Harvey Schiller. And many a times I have seen him within arm's distance in Cooperstown in the summer. And so many times I want to pull him aside and ask him about his time, around wrestling with TBS. But something always tells me you don't want to do that. Not wrong time, wrong place. But I would love to be able to talk to these people now and get their reflections, given 30 years experience of what happened in the wrestling business, where it's at today. But it's leadership, and that's why WCW, they didn't have the person on top like Vince McMahon was there making the final decision. It was, a board of people making decisions. You had people that just weren't interested in wrestling.
And then also on the booking side of it, there was always havoc and there was always political turmoil on the back and who was going to be the booker and who the committee was. And there was always the politics going back. And there was never that type of consistency either of one driving force in the promotion that was leading creative. So, yeah, they had a lot of issues and problems. And us as fans back then were always rooting for them, but we always knew, similar to like what happens each and every year with the New York Mets, that they're going to find some way to screw it up. Way to screw it up.
I always felt that the cardinal mistake with Turner is that they bought WCW, but they should have left the Crockett's in charge. I think that would have been way better than what they came up with on their own. There's no two ways about it. I mean, the Crockett's never would have made the cardinal mistakes that Jim Herd and subsequent leaders did after that point. I think it would have worked too.
There were wrestling people too, the Crockett's.
Yes.
And with the resources that they, if they would have been able to been given those resources of the Turner money, it could have been a different story today.
Oh, sure. But, you made a great point. Wrestling should be run by wrestling people. People talk about Eric Bischoff, but he was wrestling people by the time he walked into WCW.
He was.
And he brought other wrestling people with him. And look what happened.
Yeah, it was an amazing run for him. And one thing about the news capsule, too, that I wanted to bring up was the story that you talked about Inside Edition, that they were going to air the Billy Graham, David Schultz interview. And that story, that piece on Inside Edition, opened up the can of worms. And then when these two guys appear on what's going to be our next episode here at the podcast with Billy Graham and David Schultz, you're talking about the stuff hitting the fan. This is the first we're hearing of it. from Donny's news capsule that this Inside Edition piece is coming out. And then we continue it on Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and it made a back page story in the New York Post from that show.